In the sweltering summer of the late 1960s, a restless energy crept over California's sun-baked deserts and neon-lit streets. The landscape shimmered with the promise of liberation and experimentation, and among those seeking escape from the confines of conventional society was Charles Manson. Born into a troubled childhood, he had long been a wanderer, observing human weaknesses, picking up discarded philosophies, and slowly building his own dark understanding of power and influence. In the shadowed corners of Los Angeles's urban sprawl, Manson moved like a ghost between rundown apartments and isolated trailer parks. His early days were spent roaming the city's fringes, trailing the counterculture. People whispered about him on street corners, how his brooding eyes and persuasive words could hypnotize the desperate and the lost. He was neither a hero nor a simple madman, but something in between, a poet of despair and a conspirator of ruin. Every evening, in a dilapidated room with peeling wallpaper and a single bare light bulb, Manson scribbled notes about society's ills and rehearsed his quiet, unsettling sermons. He believed that the world was rotten, and that only through radical transformation could it be reborn. Over time, his monologues grew more profound, intermingled with half-remembered notions of apocalyptic battles between light and darkness. It was in this grim solitude that the seeds of a dangerous revolution were sown. During a chance encounter at a rundown cafe on the fringes of Hollywood, Manson met Tex Watson, a young man whose life had been punctuated by fleeting jobs and bitter disappointments. Tex had seen the dark side of the American dream, and as Manson's words unfolded, he felt a magnetic pull toward the mysterious leader. Tex was drawn not only by promises of a liberated life free from societal chains, but also by the sense that he, too, could become part of something greater, a transformation that defied all logic. Over the following weeks, Tex introduced Manson to a motley circle of outsiders. Susan Atkins, with a haunted past and a desperate need for belonging, listened intently to the new teachings. Leslie Van Houten, whose life had been marred by family rejection and isolation, found in Manson's quiet intensity a reflection of her own inner turmoil. Patricia Krenwinkel, a fragile soul searching for meaning amid chaos, soon joined the gathering. They were all lured by the promise of a truth that only those on the margins could understand. In secret corners of Los Angeles, the nascent community, soon known simply as the family, gathered in abandoned warehouses, campers' vans parked on dusty back roads, and even the ruins of once thriving apartments. Manson's presence was always enigmatic, a blend of gentleness and menace. His lectures were both poetic and disquieting, describing a coming upheaval, a revolution ignited by human sin and fueled by the very chaos of modern life. For months, the family's days unfolded in an eerie mixture of communal living and meticulous routine. Their mornings were marked by a quiet discipline. They rose early to share a meager breakfast, sitting close together as if in supplication to some unseen force. Manson would often be at the head of a weather-beaten wooden table, his face a mask of calm intensity, reciting cryptic verses that promised redemption through fire and blood. Tex, whose rugged features bore the marks of both cynicism and loyalty, took charge of minor tasks, scouting local places, arranging meetings, and keeping watch over the group. Susan found solace in small acts of routine, meticulously cleaning their shared living space and preparing modest meals that barely masked her inner turmoil. Meanwhile, Leslie and Patricia, drawn to the quiet whispers of possibility, engaged in subtle exercises of self-exploration. They would speak softly in cornered rooms, developing a camaraderie woven from shared loneliness and the hope of transformation. Their rituals evolved over time. The family would venture into deserted parts of the city at night, as if daring the oppressive darkness to reveal hidden truths. In these midnight jaunts, Manson's words echoed off graffiti-stained walls and empty alleys. Each expedition was marked by a sense of forbidden knowledge, as if the crumbling urban landscape held secrets only revealed to those who dared to look beyond the surface. Manson's sermons, delivered in hushed tones beneath flickering streetlights, were laden with a premonition of cataclysm. He spoke of a breaking point, when the established order would crumble, and chaos would wash over society like a tidal wave. Yet, he never detailed the methods or the exact moments of this upheaval, leaving an unsettling ambiguity that both fascinated and terrified his followers. As California's hippie movement flourished, the stark contrast between everyday life and the family's isolated existence became ever more pronounced. The world outside raged with its own battles, political unrest, civil rights movements, and the haunting memory of war. But within the sanctum of the family, time seemed to move according to Manson's own dark rhythm. His prophetic visions and cryptic dialogues painted the future as an imminent breakdown of order, a revolution that would erupt unexpectedly, dragging everyone into its vortex. Manson's voice, at once a lullaby and a death knell, wove through the days of his followers. There was a scene on a humid afternoon when he led the group to a remote desert hideaway, where the endless sky met barren land. There, amidst the whispering winds and shifting sands, Manson explained that the world was teetering on the edge of madness, a madness that would engulf all who failed to prepare. His words resonated with the members, planting seeds of both dread and hope. They believed that by aligning themselves with his vision, they could be reborn in a world remade from the ashes. The days following the retreat were imbued with a strange intensity. In the quiet hours before dawn, Tex and a few others observed the horizon with a mix of awe and foreboding. Each sunset painted the desert with hues that bordered on the surreal, as if nature itself was hinting at the coming storm. Within the cramped quarters of their motley refuge, the family rehearsed the minutiae of their new lifestyle, with each member silently acknowledging that the old world was destined to vanish under the weight of impending chaos. At night, while most slept in uneasy silence, Manson wandered among his followers, sometimes sharing a conspiratorial smile or a glimpse of tenderness in his eyes. His charisma was a complex tapestry of personal pain and unsettling clarity, a combination that bound the family together even as it drove them deeper into a forbidden realm of thought. Although the days were filled with routine and ritual, the atmosphere was charged with a tension that could easily erupt into violence. One crisp morning, as early autumn light filtered through dusty windows, Manson announced that the family needed to wake the sleepers from their comfortable ignorance. The words were delivered without overt excitement, but those who listened understood that nothing would ever be the same again. Over a breakfast of stale bread and weak coffee, his voice trembled slightly as he recounted a vision. a vision of a society undone by its own decadence, urging his followers to take decisive action. Tex's eyes darkened with a fierce determination. It was as if the transformation of daily routines and whispered dreams had coalesced into a single, incendiary moment of clarity. In the days that followed, meetings became more frequent and secretive, each charged with a sense of escalating urgency. The family split into small cells, with each cell given specific tasks. Some would monitor the local press for signs of imminent upheaval, while others practiced surreptitious maneuvers that hinted at a more nefarious purpose. Susan's internal world churned with conflicting emotions. Part of her revered Manson as a savior, while another part shuddered at the sinister potential of his visions. Despite the tension, she immersed herself in everyday routines, washing dishes, tidying the sparse quarters, trying to cling to an echo of normality amid the mounting dread. Meanwhile, Leslie and Patricia, who had grown inseparable in their shared isolation, found solace in each other's quiet support, their whispered confidences echoing like secret incantations of loyalty. Manson's guidance was cryptic, yet compelling. In hushed discussions held in basements and abandoned garages, he avoided naming any specific targets. Instead, his narrative was filled with ominous forecasts and riddling references to a coming reckoning. The system is rotten, and only the fire can cleanse it, he would say, his voice low and hypnotic. His followers listened, absorbed every syllable, and felt the pull of destiny drawing them inexorably toward a precipice from which there might be no return. As summer slipped into a cooler autumn, rumors of societal collapse began to seep through the fringes of local news. Protests, sporadic acts of vandalism, and a general undercurrent of anxiety rippled through the streets of Los Angeles. To the family, these were signs that Manson's vision was materializing, a confirmation that the moment to act was drawing near. The ordinary patterns of life outside their enclave clashed with the extraordinary plans being hatched in secret meetings, creating an undercurrent of suspense and inevitability. On a deceptively normal day in early October, the air was laden with the metallic tang of an approaching storm. A storm that seemed to mirror the turbulent emotions simmering within the family. Manson, sensing that time was running short, gathered his followers with a calm gravity that belied the grim undercurrent of his intent. His eyes, reflecting both sorrow and resolve, swept over the assembled faces in the dim light of an abandoned living room. There was a collective murmur that resonated with an unspoken understanding. The moment to erase the old order had arrived. As the meeting progressed, Manson delivered his words in measured tones. Instead of a direct proclamation of violence, he recited a litany of metaphors, each a veiled allusion to the destructive act that lay ahead. His language remained deliberately ambiguous, allowing every member of the family to interpret the message in their own way. Tex's knuckles tightened around the worn handle of a pocket knife as he absorbed every word, while Susan, Leslie, and Patricia exchanged glances loaded with unuttered fear and fatalistic acceptance. In a nearby park, under the watchful gaze of indifferent statues and rusting lampposts, a small cell of the family moved with quiet precision. Their actions, rehearsed in hushed urgency over long days of cryptic instructions, carried a semblance of ritual rather than randomness. They drifted through the shadows, their identities obscured by the cover of twilight, moving as if in a choreographed dance. No one could foresee the full implications of this covert activity, as the members themselves were locked in an internal struggle between devotion and terror. At the heart of these preparations, Manson's vision crystallized into a plan that would shatter any remaining semblance of normalcy. Yet he never explicitly warned of the repercussions, nor did he offer any comfort regarding the moral ramifications. Each member felt the weight of destiny pressing upon them, a pressure so intense that it blurred the line between salvation and damnation. It was as if the very air they breathed had turned heavy with consequence, and each breath carried the potential to ignite a conflagration of irreversible events. For Tex, that day held a bitter duality. His internal conflict was palpable. Every whispered reassurance from Manson was countered by a flicker of doubt that screamed of inevitable horror. Nevertheless, in a mixture of devotion and fatalism, he stepped forward into the unknown, leaving behind traces of who he had once been. The plan was set in motion, and every movement held a note of tragic inevitability. Night fell over the city like an ominous shroud. The days of careful routines and secret meetings gave way to the final harrowing hours before the prescribed act of violence. In a dimly lit room in a modest suburban home, the family members gathered once more. The conversation was sparse, dominated by heavy silences punctuated only by the soft hum of distant traffic and the ticking of an old clock. Manson's final directions were murmured in the dark, his voice a soft incantation that resonated deeply within every soul present. Though no one had seen the spark that would fully set the night ablaze, every member felt its inevitability. Their eyes were locked on a horizon they could neither change nor escape, a horizon that promised nothing but the collapse of their existing lives. Susan's hands trembled slightly as she prepared for what she believed was the necessary step toward an elusive redemption. Around her, others readied themselves in a silent flurry of fatal determination. Tex, with his every fiber taut with suppressed energy, moved as if following an unspoken command. Despite the quiet camaraderie that had grown among them through months of shared isolation, each member now seemed isolated in their own private terror, confronting an act they could neither fully control nor fully abandon. As they advanced on their designated locations, every step was weighted with a foreboding sense of doom. Manson had instructed them to remain silent, to let the unfolding events speak for themselves, rather than explaining the vision that had driven them to this point. The night was a canvas of shadows and trembling light, and the city itself seemed unaware that it was about to be scarred by an act of inexplicable violence. In a stilted sequence of minutes that stretched into an eternity, the ritual that had been building in secret came to fruition. Manson's influence, which had inched its way into the hearts and minds of his devoted followers, culminated in a series of actions that were as sudden as they were incomprehensible. The echoes of that night reverberated through the lives of countless individuals, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, shattered trust, and an indescribable aura of malevolence that would forever haunt the streets of Los Angeles. In the chaotic hours that followed, the city awoke to a grim and unrecognizable reality. The carefully honed routines of daily life had been violently interrupted, and the fallout left behind a landscape of fear and disbelief. In the days of investigation and quiet suburban gossip, The details of that fateful night were pieced together like fragments of a disturbing puzzle. A puzzle whose final image revealed a tapestry woven from desperation, charismatic manipulation, and a despair so profound that it had consumed ordinary souls. Detectives and journalists combed through the aftermath, trying to extract meaning from a series of inexplicable actions. Among them, Tex's solitary figure was described as one haunted by a quiet intensity, his eyes reflecting both the burden of his actions and a lingering hope that there might be redemption in truth. Susan, once a gentle soul with hopes for a normal life, was now depicted in tearful interviews as a person caught between love for her once-beloved mentor and the unbearable guilt of what her hands had helped create. Leslie and Patricia, who had been inseparable in their earlier days of shared isolation, now appeared as remnants of a lost era, trying in vain to stitch together fragments of shattered identity and remorse. Manson, ever the enigmatic puppeteer, had vanished into the sprawling network of back roads and desert highways. His whereabouts remained a mystery as he evaded authorities with an almost spectral ability to dissolve into the night. Yet his influence, a spectral echo, remained imprinted on the souls of those who had followed him. In quiet moments, both in the minds of his former devotees and the collective consciousness of a nation left in shock, his whispered promises of transformation and the imagery of an impending apocalypse lingered like a dark forewarning. The streets of Los Angeles, once bathed in the hopeful glow of a cultural revolution, now bore scars that would not easily fade. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the strange visitors, the silent meetings held in back alleys, and the unknown figures whose lives had been irrevocably altered by events that defied understanding. The legacy of that violent night spread like a malignant shadow, a cautionary tale of how charismatic rhetoric could twist the very fabric of reality. As weeks turned into months and the initial shock of the events gradually seeped into the collective memory of the nation, investigative teams continued to dig into the origins of the extremist cell. Historians, criminologists, and psychologists gathered fragments of evidence, seeking to understand the anatomy of a charismatic force that had marshaled ordinary lives into an extraordinary tragedy. Manson remained an elusive figure in these recollections, a ghost whose philosophies had seeped into the soul of a generation. Tex, now a man aged by remorse and the relentless passage of time, sometimes walked the same streets where he had once blurred into the background. At dusk, he would pause before a graffiti-covered wall and reflect in silence on the fatal decisions of youth. His internal landscape was a maze of regret, redemption, and the irreparable transformations that violence brings. In these quiet moments, he wondered if the world might someday forgive the sins committed under the weight of a twisted ideology, or if perhaps forgiveness was a luxury reserved only for the unscathed. For those who had once believed that the calamity was an isolated aberration, the reality was that the aftershocks would continue to reverberate for decades. Families torn apart by grief, communities struggling to heal, and an enduring dread that the forces of chaos might rise again. All these were the legacy of a moment when ordinary lives were drawn into an extraordinary, deadly dance.